Welcome to a very special moment. This is a combined general services and public works. It's a new approach to saving time and money somewhere. So welcome Dan Gookin, Kiki Miller, and I don't remember what committees we used to be on, but we're all here together to kind of tromp through this. So our first item, Troy Tymason, our city administrator, in relation to somebody giving us some art.
Very good. Thank you, council members. Yes, I bring before you your opportunity to weigh in on a piece of art that would be loaned to the city. There is no expenditure. This has been approved by and recommended to you by our Arts Commission as per the art ordinance in the city of Coeur d'Alene. Dan and Catherine Pinkerton are owners of the Idaho Character Foundation, doing business as the Idaho Wildlife Museum, located down in Riverstone at 2000 West John Loop. They came forward with this exceptional piece of art to possibly lend to the city, to put on city property very near their building. This statue is approximately 12 feet tall and has a value of approximately $250,000. I've placed a picture of the artist up there. A Lorenzo Guglieri is a world-renowned artist and sculptor. His bronze creations have graced many prestigious museums and art collections throughout the world, including the White House, including the Vatican, the Kremlin, and collections by Ronald Reagan, Tiger Woods, Pavarotti, Pope John Paul II, George Bush Sr., King John Carlos of Spain, former Vice President Al Gore, Mr. Arnold Schwarzenegger, and billionaire Ross Perot, just to name a few. And there are some of the photos of some of the folks mentioned. So this artwork loan program is designed to allow the owners to keep the art and for the citizenry to take a look at it. Again, this would be down at the Riverstone Pond, very near the 2000 West John Loop address of the business. It would not be moved without express written permission from the Idaho Wildlife Museum. If the city determines to use this location, the folks from the Idaho Wildlife Museum would want to be a party if it was to be moved. So the museum would maintain this in their collection. They would indemnify the city. They would hold us harmless from any damages or liability related to this artwork. They would also seek to help with the site prep, the engineering, the pad, and the marker that we would place there, recognizing them as well as the artist. Our proposed agreement with them would be for 5 years with an automatic extension for successive 5-year terms. So again, Arts Commission took action on this at their meeting in January. We do not anticipate any significant cost on this because the donors have also talked about helping us with the engineering, helping us with the plaque. However, the Arts Commission is prepared to assist with that if need be. So the art piece is a very large bronze. That is it in reality. And I would stand for any questions you may have.
Kiki.
Just one. Troy I'm supporting the Arts Commission. I think they probably went through all of this, and I'd support what their decision was. If there's limited locations for new art in Riverstone, I know that there's a lot there. So would this replace a location that we had a spot, or would this be in addition to a location in case another Arts Current piece came up?
You had to go there.
The artist has looked at the site, the donor has looked at the site, and they would like it to go where marker number 11 was located previously, city-owned property. So that would be the recommendation that came forward in conjunction with the donor.
And that Arts Commission was okay with that
Absolutely, yep,
and losing the spot?
yep.
Danny Boy.
I have nothing relevant to say.
Oh, I have a couple. So is this going to be lit at night? It's rather large.
It's not proposed to be lit. We don't have power right there, so we're attempting to save money.
Okay, and the money to do the work is coming out of the Arts Fund?
Most of the money for the work is coming from the donor. He's been very generous in setting it up. We have it covered both ways, council member, yes. So if it isn't done by the donor, the Arts Commission would pick it up, which would be normal, but he's offered it up in his application.
And the bear isn't making any weird faces that somebody might take wrong or anything like that, right? Have you seen it?
Not in person, I have not.
All right, any other questions? I'll look for a motion.
I'd make a motion to approve the agreement. I don't have my notes in front of me. To approve the agreement, the artwork loan agreement with Idaho Character Foundation, doing business as Idaho Wildlife Museum, for the sculpture by Lorenzo, can't pronounce the last name, so I won't butcher that, titled Unconquered.
Gieri.
Okay.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Other comments, suggestions? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Aye, aye. Thank you.
Marker 11.
Well, this is going to be the highlight of the afternoon. This is Chris Bosley coming in about traffic calming. That's like going slower, right, Chris?
I'm sorry, this is your highlight. Thank you, council, for having me come before you today. It was almost a year ago to date that I came before the committee to talk about a draft traffic calming policy. And at the time, I got some feedback, some questions and comments that were raised during that time, and then one subsequent one. And so these were the questions that I was asked, or the comments given at that time, about funding, police data, education, differentiation between arterials and other streets, and then getting a more current safety study as an example in there. So I'll go through each of those now. So the first question was, how do we fund all these requests for traffic calming? And so my answer to this is that we would maintain an annual funding in there in our budget, and then we would prioritize those needs. And we would just do what we can each year, and then we would have the opportunity to reassess that each year and determine if that was enough or not. I can't see that we would generally have to use all of the budget on it, depending on what is chosen for that, but some infrastructure items can be rather expensive and wouldn't even fit into that funding. So I think this will be kind of a trial to see whether funding is appropriate for those levels or not.
Any questions on that, you guys? I wondered, would that be a dedicated fund that would roll over if you didn't spend it, or will you just absorb the rest of it in for the
It
year?
hasn't rolled over to date. It was just a line item
So it is
in
a line
our
item,
department's
okay.
budget, yes.
Do you have anything else that I know, for example, I mean, you have a good winter like this one, we don't spend the money, we tend to spend it on something else. Do you have anything else where you keep it year to year or it accrues?
Do we have any other line items
Yeah, and the
that do
streets
that?
engineering budget.
The chip seal and overlay budget does
Okay.
that.
All right, thanks.
Another question or comment that was raised was to get police safety data. And so I just wanted to show, in this example, this is like one street that traffic data that is pulled from the LTAC website, the Local Highway Technical Assistant Council, and they have the state traffic crash data on that website, usually within 1 to 2 years old and 5 years before that. It takes a full year before it gets put into the cycle. But I was just showing that in an instance like this, I would start with this data, and then I would speak to the police department because they would have more current data, and then they would have the actual crash reports that you can really whittle down to see what was the cause of the crash. Sometimes they're pretty vague on these statewide crash reports, so I think it is important to work with the police department on these to see if we're really treating the symptom or the cause.
Question for you on that?
What's
So
that?
is crash data is the kind of the main thing you look at? Is that the driving force, is crash data?
The driving force is generally the speeding, that somebody reports speeding concerns, and that's what makes us look into that. And I'll get to that towards the end of this and just kind of show you how we go about determining whether or not traffic calming would be warranted or not. Another comment was that education may be more effective in some circumstances, and I totally agree with that. I've got one page of this draft policy that speaks to education and what the neighborhoods can do. We feel that that should be the first choice for a lot of locations because people can talk to their neighbors about speeding. Sometimes the only people speeding are the only people living in that neighborhood because there's only one way in and out of those neighborhoods. So a little peer pressure on your neighbors might go a long ways. And then yard signs also, and we've seen those spring up occasionally to kind of shame people into slowing their speeds down a little bit.
I have a question. In the old days, we used to call the police pulling you over as education. Do we not do that anymore, or do they not do that anymore?
They certainly do. They have a tolerance for what is acceptable for speeding because, as you know, driving yourself, speeds tend to creep up and down, and we don't want to pull over the honest people, I guess. So there is a little bit of a tolerance there. And our officers also have a lot of other things going on during the day, so they may not be able to pull someone over. They may be reporting to some incident or other circumstance.
So traffic enforcement would have to be a priority on their end, not necessarily, well, it fits into the education side for you, right?
Correct, and they do some saturation patrols in areas when that is warranted, just to get the message across also.
Thanks.
And then another comment was, make it clear what's an arterial versus residential and efficiency versus safety on this. And so my thought on this is that this policy is not intended for arterials because they are emergency routes, they are, a lot of times they are school routes, they are snow routes, and a lot of times trying to calm traffic on these is beyond our means, especially like, for instance, Prairie Avenue, which actually isn't ours, but or Government Way, where it's 5 lanes wide. It's pretty tough to put in like curb extensions or speed humps on something like that to slow traffic down. It's just beyond the intent of that. And what we're really looking at is to improve safety where people live or go to school. And that's why I put in that safety is a priority in residential areas, because we want people to drive slower to improve the safety of those neighborhoods. And then collectors fit somewhere in between, and so that needs more of a balanced approach. And so I put in this graphic here to show you that this is what the KMPO, the Kootenai Metropolitan Planning Organization, has listed as the classifications for each of our streets, and these come from federal functional classification. So you can see the green ones are the arterials, but major collectors are in purple, and those are also, they act a lot like an arterial, so there's some judgment that has to go into that, whether or not it should be treated with traffic calming or not. And then we have our own list of arterials here, that these are what we treat as arterials for like snow plowing and such like that, because they move a lot of traffic. So some judgment has to be made as to what would receive traffic calming based on these types of classifications.
Can we go back to the previous slide?
This one?
Yeah. So it's hard for me to see some of the stuff because not every street's up there. Oh, no, I mean, I can see it. I'm looking for things. So where would, so Pennsylvania's not on there. It's not an arterial or a collector?
That one is,
South.
yeah,
So it's not on there. And then Honeysuckle is not on there.
correct. That
And-
one's here, yeah,
Mullen's not on there.
correct.
And Seventh is considered a collector.
Correct.
Okay.
And third and fourth.
And third and fourth, of course. I'm just reviewing the places where I know and I've heard that there's a problem with with traffic and trying to see which one of the streets are arterials and which ones are collectors, and it doesn't look like any of them, aside from 7th, are up there.
Right, generally, we don't get many complaints from speeding on the big roads like Government Way and things like that. Usually it's close to home where people have their concerns.
Like 7th, we get a lot of complaints
Yeah.
on 7th.
Yes,
Thank you.
you're welcome. And so another comment was to cite a more current safety study. I had just been using the 1991 study from the UK about pedestrian fatalities with vehicle collisions, just because it's cited everywhere. So I made an effort to find something more recent. There are a lot of different studies out there. The numbers vary, but they all have a general trend, and that's the faster you go, the
Deader you
greater
are.
chance of killing someone. So this graphic here is from a 2013 study that I have put into the revised policy, or the new version of the policy, I should say. And then also, I was asked how speed limits are set. And this slide is repeated in my speed limit presentation next, because I wasn't sure what I would be doing first, but it's relevant to both in that federal law dictates speed limits blanket-wise, but then in terms of maximums, like a while ago, the federal maximum was raised on interstates to be a little bit higher than it is today. At one time, for fuel consumption purposes, it was 55. And the song "I Can't Drive 55" was popular at the time.
Double nickel.
So then going beyond that, states set their speed limits for local jurisdictions, basically saying that, you know, if you're going to move traffic, it's going to be a little bit higher speed limit, residential areas are a little bit lower. And then we take that information and we modify it based on the needs of the city itself and what really the nature of those streets might look like. And that's why we have posted speed limits, and those are based on the local needs of what that street needs. And then obviously there's school zones, work zones, variable ones we don't have around here. Those are like night speed limits or wind speed limits and things like that. And then advisories, we have a few of those on really sharp curves where we just want to warn people that it wasn't designed for the speed that the rest of the street is posted at.
A quick question on that. So
Yes.
speed limits aren't set by how wide the lane is, or that has no bearing
A
on
lot of that factors into it. There are a couple different programs out there that you can use to determine speed limits, and that is one of the factors that goes into it, is the width of the lanes. But there are a lot of factors like the number of driveways per mile and the presence of bicycles or pedestrians and intersection frequency and things like that, visibility. It all goes into a program to figure out what the speed limit should be for that particular road. And really, it's harder to change speed limits once a road is established, but while you're designing it, you can design it for a certain speed and post it for that. But coming in later, it's tough to change it. That's why, like on Celtice Way, we were able to go with 35 miles per hour all the way out to the end because we were starting from scratch. If we had started with the old US 10 highway and just overlaid it, it wouldn't have been a good example because there wouldn't have been much curvature and things like that in it, especially no roundabouts.
So there's no math equation, huh? X amount of feet and inches.
No, not a direct correlation like that.
Thanks.
But narrower lanes do tend to slow people down because it feels tighter. And bringing anything up near the edge of the road also gives that feeling to cause people to slow down. So then I just wanted to go over what our current process is right now, and the policy kind of matches this, except that we don't go to committee with a bunch of other departments to talk about it, because generally these are low impact things that we have been working on. But our current process is that first we'll receive a traffic calming request from a citizen. And when we get an opportunity, then we'll go out and perform speed counts. And this little guy up here is the speed counter that we really like to use because, as you can see, it's just tucked away. Not many people know it's there. It doesn't have any effect on the speed that they're driving because they don't know it's there. We've also purchased one of these units so we can test out whether or not a speed feedback sign is going to be effective in that situation or not. But these tend to slow people down a little bit because that's what they're supposed to do. So they collect traffic speed data also, but it also has an effect on how fast they really are going. And so then once we get the counts, we get a printout like this. And you can see on this one, the 85th percentile speed was 31 miles per hour. That means they were driving, the 85% of all vehicles on that street were driving 6 miles per hour over the speed limit. And there's a maximum speed in there of 48 miles per hour. We always have anomalies like that. Somebody's going to be driving fast. Sometimes it's emergency response and they need to be driving that fast, but we're going to catch them with this device, so we can't rule that out. So then once we take a look at all that data, then we determine what the appropriate countermeasure would be, whether it's really an enforcement issue or what. And we have put up these speed feedback signs in a couple different circumstances. And so I just want to remind you what the purpose of our traffic calming policy was, and it was to put some data to use here and prioritize where our money should be spent or our energy should be spent on slowing traffic down. And we want consistency in each application so that we don't favor one location over another. And it's a more efficient use of staff time and that we don't keep going back to the same part looking to solve a problem when we've determined that the 85th percentile or generally most of the speeds are pretty low. So, and I just threw this picture in there because if we had this weather year-round, we wouldn't be having this conversation, so.
Yeah, that weather year-round, only 5,000 people would live here.
Correct.
I have a question in
Yeah.
regards to, what is the 85%? Why is that the magic number?
That has just been a kind of a federal guideline for setting speed limits or determining whether or not there is a speeding problem. Because that just says that 85% of people are going that speed or lower, 15% are exceeding that speed, whatever that 85th percentile speed is.
Okay.
What happens if it goes up to like 90%? Does it change the data much?
The 90th percentile?
Yeah.
Well, the number would be a bit higher. But generally, the equipment that we use just kicks out that number because that is a set federal guideline, so that's the number we get from it.
Seems like the person who's in the neighborhood tends to notice the 15%.
Correct, yes. Yes, and a lot of times traffic seems to be moving faster than it really is. Depending on how loud the vehicle is approaching or how large or small the vehicle is approaching, it can really change your perception of how fast that vehicle really is moving. So
That's all you got?
that's all I've got. With that, I'd stand for any questions.
You got anything?
Just one thing, so in that 85th percentile question, in here it's, if their speed is 7 miles per hour or over the posted speed, then that, and the 85th percentile tracks that, that's when it kicks in to be prioritized for a traffic calming procedure.
Right, and that was based on conversations with the police department on where they felt that number should be set as far as.
At 7 miles per hour over.
Correct, yes.
Okay, so that came from police. And then, so then there's a priority of what would happen, the least intrusive and least expensive, most efficient would be attempted first. And so then, I had a question on this yard sign idea, just because we're going through signs and sign ordinance issues and all that. Is there something that is a standardized sign that communities use for this purpose rather than individual neighborhoods making up sign clutter ads? Is there some sort of a standardized template?
There aren't that I know of, but a lot of examples are repeated. I've done Google searches to find different yard signs, and a lot of them are, like, the drive like your children live here kind of thing that we've all seen, and slow down, people live here kind of thing. I mean, a lot of the same, they may be a different style of sign, but the message is the same across most of them.
I just felt like that might, if we're trying to apply a consistent approach throughout the community, it might be good in the policy to recommend a certain style or type of sign, so that as you drive through these neighborhoods, you become aware that that's a traffic area and it's more familiar, rather than being distracted by different verbiage, different colors, different things like that. So I just thought that might be a consistent recommendation in the policy to use a consistent style of or type of sign.
Yeah, I could put a recommended place to look for those types of signs in that.
I think that would be helpful. I had one other item in here, and go ahead if you have anything. I'll come back
Sure.
to it if you don't mind.
Thank you. I think that Mr. Thompson will be very happy to see that his company's vehicle is driving under the speed limit. I just thought that was funny. So it says in the plan, in the proposal for the calming policy, that a speeding complaint is received by the city. So who does it? Are we going to have a dedicated line for that, or are they just going to phone up the main line?
They generally talk to our department. Most of those
Streets.
calls go to me, yes, or
Okay.
one of our inspectors.
And you list speed counts are performed on the street of concern near the property owner's location if feasible, and you have the 85th percentile in there. You have, if the recorded 85th percentile does not meet the threshold, no counts are needed, but it doesn't have anything in there about design, but you do have it under project selection criteria. So if someone makes a complaint, I mean, I think what I'm driving at here and what I kind of got to toward the end was, is there any kind of database that you have or any list of streets that are potential candidates for traffic calming?
No, I haven't gone to that length to comb through all the streets to figure out which ones would be candidates or not.
Well, okay, so it's going to be complaint-driven then?
Correct, yes.
'Cause I
Much
think
like
that-
code enforcement.
Yeah, it factors into it, because I think sometimes you have a street like Pennsylvania that's just wide enough to play football on, and it's really a residential street, it's not a collector or anything, and you know this, because, I mean, you're our engineer, you know there are some streets, and there seems to be this wild inconsistency, that some streets, like Military near my house, is like 16 feet wide.
Right.
And then Pennsylvania is, I mean, literally 80 feet wide. I mean, you could run 5 lanes there if you wanted to. And so it seems to me that would be a better candidate than something else, just based on the street design, that it's like, well, we need to look at that. You had Walnut up there earlier, and I think Walnut's going to kind of resolve itself as they straighten 95 or curve it around there.
Eventually.
You know, because then you won't be able to go through that way. Or if you do, you're going to have to go through some kind of mechanism to get there.
Right, and I planned on reevaluating that once ITD has finished their project to do another set of counts out there to see what's changed since ITD has finished their project. But
Right.
that's put off till 2026, I believe.
Oh, yeah, I know, jeez.
You'll still be here, right?
Yeah.
I hope so.
I'm not pleased with that kicking that can down the road. I'd also be curious to see whether those traffic incidents that were marked on Government Way are related to that connection, or whether it's just because Walnut jogs there, you know, like so many streets do in the city, and it seems to be a very popular place to cross. One thing I liked in the policy was the property owner buy-in. Traffic calming measurements are measures proposed for neighborhoods and businesses districts will require written approval from 2/3 of the residents. So we don't have the process for that. So how do you envision the process taking place if someone, you know, such as our friend on Masters Drive, wants to get some kind of owner buy-in? What steps are required to get written approval for 2/3? I mean, is he going to go door to door, or is there going to be an official process?
I would envision that the property owners would go door to door because they're the ones initiating that process. We should probably come up with just a standard form for signatures, just so that they all look the same kind of thing. But I wouldn't put that onus on city staff to go out and get those signatures. And the reason why I want neighborhood buy-in on all these is because traffic calming measures could be expensive, putting them in, and we don't want to have to pull them out because the neighborhood gets excited about something that got put in because of a small number requesting it.
Also, in the form of buy-in, what kind of a option would be available to residents who say don't meet our criteria for, I mean, their 85th percentile looks good, they still have concerns, say it's a street design issue, it's a cut through, which is what Masters has become. What other methods do people have to put their own skin in the game? For example, if they want to get, say, a sign that flashes when people are speeding, is there anything in here, or can we put something in here so that if neighbors, say, wanted to raise the funds to buy one of these, that we would be open to that?
There was a small discussion in there about local improvement district, and I believe that's something that could be handled for circumstances like that. If they don't meet our criteria, but they still feel that it's warranted and they have neighborhood buy-in, that is something that, working with the city, there could be a solution that could be funded by the property owners themselves.
So do we have a list anywhere, or would they just contact you to see what would the cost be of that kind of a flashing sign versus, say, an RRFB or a speed table or a speed bump or any of the other diverters and things that you discussed in here? Would that be something that you would go forward and describe to them the things? I mean, because I know you wouldn't want to do those because the rules say, well, that doesn't apply here. But if you had a whole bunch of people who said, no, we'll pay for it.
Right.
Is that something that could happen?
Yes, it is something that could happen, but that would be something that I would have to bring to council for approval, because that would be changing something with traffic patterns. And that requires council approval for that, so that I could help the citizens get to that point and then bring it to council for approval.
Does it need to be in the policy?
The steps for that?
Yeah.
Perhaps I could put that in there, yes.
Okay, thank you. Did you remember your question?
I did.
Yes.
And one was a follow-up to that one, in that if there is a situation where a citizen wants to do that, how in the policy would they appeal a decision? I mean, if a citizen came up and said, we want to do this, this is what we believe, here's our data, but our process in this policy was contrary to their findings, how would they have an opportunity to appeal your decision to council based on this policy?
We don't have any language in there for appealing the decision. We just made this, tried to make this as cut and dried as possible as far as using speed numbers and data to make these decisions on. If something like that were to be appealed, it could be run through as a local improvement district option, but I don't know that we want to put appeal options in for city funding, because then we would just get someone saying, well, the traffic counts were taken during a full moon, you need to, that kind of thing.
Okay.
So, and then we'd be going out there and doing it all over again.
That makes sense. And then my other follow-up was, if you were involving all of the departments that are affected by this, and I'm thinking public safety when you consider what a calming strategy might be, is there a priority based on their input? In other words, you might have come up with a traffic calming policy, but then fire comes in and says, absolutely not on that street, it's too important to us to get to where we need to go. Would their input overrule what you may have been wanting to suggest? Is that how you envision the priorities of the policy?
Yeah, I envision that emergency services would be first and foremost, that we don't want to do anything that hinders their response times, because then it would kind of defeat the purpose of improving safety by putting them in a situation where the emergency response has slowed because of it. So they're kind of up there as the ones who can really say no to something, but that's why we want to work closely with them to see what's acceptable and what's not.
Okay, and that kind of, I guess, tied into this utilization of narrowing the streets by encouraging on-street parking. And it's such an opposite message from, especially all winter, even in a mild winter, we're saying, don't park on the street. And if you have an ADU or a vacation rental, you can't park on the street. But then now we're going to say, but if it's a procedure to encourage people to park on the street, I feel like that's going to be a real confusing message in some neighborhoods. But I can see where it might work. It just was one that struck me as being pretty contradictory to what we often.
Right, I can see that. But generally, when we have snow issues, that's generally not the time of year that we have speeding
Right.
complaints either.
Unless it's
so.
a month like this.
Right.
So, got you. That's really all I had. Except for the potential, when I say, except for one more thing, of utilizing, is this a policy that could be pushed out through our block watch groups? As far as, when you said get the neighborhoods together, there's already block watch groups through, so would that be part of, or should it be part of the policy that becomes part of the block watch information?
I think they should all be aware of it. I think this is something that we would put on our website as well, so that citizens could download this and review it to see how it may or may not apply to their situation.
Okay, thank you.
I just need to go back to the process of neighborhood buy-in. Talked about that, and he was wondering if you were talking about possibly creating some kind of a forum. And I was just thinking that it would be important if people were signing something that they knew what they were signing it for. You know what I'm saying? Not necessarily on your part or our part, but the person who's leading the charge. Do these folks realize what they're getting into? You know?
Right, I think it needs to be clearly stated at the top of each signature sheet what they're signing, and not just a list of signatures that could be applied to anything.
Okay. So I've always thought that this, when you came out with this policy, I always thought traffic calming was narrower lanes, because you've got bike lanes everywhere, so the lanes get narrower, the left turn lanes get narrower. So I'm starting to see there's more to it. I'm really trying to grasp that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So when streets have bike lanes, automatically it's getting narrower, and usually there's no parking, right? I mean, that's kind of the combination most
Yeah, we
places.
have a couple streets like Third and Government Way that have parking and bike lanes
Right,
together.
and it pushes it out there.
Yeah.
So I guess my question is when you look at a street and you want to put a bike lane in, are you looking, as soon as a bike lane goes in, does that automatically create the need to slow things down? So you follow, which comes first, the narrow lane, the car going slower, or the bike lane?
Well, I don't think that putting in a bike lane necessitates changing a speed limit or anything like that, but it does have a traffic calming effect by narrowing lanes, because when those lanes tighten up, people tend to feel a little constrained, and they do drive slower generally. I don't think they're totally related between traffic calming and bike lane, and we don't like put one in because of the other or vice versa.
Okay, so that would kind of go back to how wide is a bike lane, which you have kind of variables everywhere. So does the bike lane become the priority over, again, I'm kind of going back to traffic calming. It sort of, to me, it sort of creates the need to traffic calm, because things get narrower, things get tighter, people go slower.
Well, generally, that's not what prompts, I mean, it's citizen concerns that prompt the whole discussion about traffic calming, not necessarily a bike lane going in.
Okay.
I haven't heard from anyone yet that I travel this street on my bike and cars travel too fast. I need it to, we need to slow them down. It's from the citizens that live along that street generally that have the problem with how fast cars are moving on that street.
So the width of a bike lane, if it's 6 feet or 4 feet or 2 feet, doesn't really have any bearing in your mind on traffic speed?
Well, it has the effect of slowing them down as a kind of an unintentional benefit of it, I should say.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Any other questions? You're good?
I'm good.
So you're walking away with some stuff?
A little bit of homework
Little
before
tweaking of-
council?
Yeah. That's what the whole thing is about, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so do we need to make a motion? We're gonna bring this to council?
Yeah, I'll make a motion that we approve the traffic calming policy with the suggestions as offered.
Second.
Been moved and second. Any other thoughts, comments? Thank you, my friend. Moving along. Oh, you're still here?
I'm still here, yep.
Oh, all those in favor, we have to vote, sorry. Say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Thank you, Chris. Moving on. Request for approval of speed limit change on Third Street. It's your show, Chris.
All right, thank you again. So this presentation is a request to be able to reduce the speed limit and raise the speed limit on Third, which is kind of a weird anomaly. And I'll get into that in just a second, but here's that graphic that I showed about how speed limits are set, and we just went through that, so I probably
But this
don't-
isn't what we're going to change Third to, right? So,
Correct, correct. So the portion of Third that we're talking about here is from downtown up to Harrison. And when our assistant city attorney or deputy city attorney was reviewing the language for the ordinance change, we noticed that the speed limit is actually starting at Spokane Ave. Well, so this is the little bit of the weird part about this. So that the speed limit coming down Third is 35. The first sign that tells you it's 30 is south of Harrison, which we all believe to be true, but in further investigation, the speed limit changes to 30 at Spokane Avenue, which doesn't seem to make sense with the current traffic flows that we have today. You know, where these cars are coming and going. Maybe it made sense at the time that Spokane Avenue would be the change, but there's no signage to indicate that. It's just in city code.
might have been because the street jogs really nasty there, and there were a lot of crashes at Third and Harrison before the street was realigned.
That could be
might have been
also
their
as you
thinking.
approach that signal there, yes. So what my reasoning for this is because there are a few streets that in Coeur d'Alene that change character substantially at about Harrison Avenue. And looking at north-south streets, Third Street, Lincoln, and Government Way all have higher speed limits than anything else downtown. Lincoln changes. That one's a little different because it's where it peels off from US 95 there at Walnut. So it's not technically at Harrison, but generally Harrison is the cutoff for those. I talked to the police department about these three streets, and they had the most support for changing the speed limit on Third to make it consistent with the others. And really, 4th Street, which Third and Fourth act as a one-way couplet. 4th Street out of town is 25. It makes sense that Third Street going into downtown would be 25 as well, and it's more of a residential neighborhood as opposed to the commercial district on 4th Street. So I put in a couple slides here to show you some of the reasons why this change, or why it's different south of Harrison, and evidence for possibly changing that speed limit. So north of Harrison, you can see there's quite a bit of distance across the street here. But once you get south of Harrison, the travel lanes narrow up, on-street parking is added, it pushes the bike lane out closer to traffic. It just feels tighter once you go south of Harrison. And then some of the other things that are factored into determining a speed limit are the presence of bikes and pedestrians, which right here at the intersection we've got a bike lane and a marked pedestrian crossing here at Foster. And another thing is sight distance. And you can see here how difficult it is to see up Third Street when you're at this intersection here. And I think this is the same intersection actually at Foster. But looking north, it's very difficult to see if any cars are coming. So if a car's driving 30 as opposed to 25, you're going to have less reaction time when finding a gap to pull out onto Third Street. So I don't have any more slides to show you on that, but I would open that for discussion to see if you agree with a reduction and increase in speed limit on Third for consistency's sake.
Well, actually, I didn't have a chance to check with legal on this, but I own property on Third Street, so I think it's probably, I'm not going to vote on this one, but I think it's going to full council anyway. So I didn't have really any other input other than I appreciated that police had recommended that that's where the change be made and that it's more consistent, which causes less confusion, and I think that's good for all.
Yes. Mr. Goopy.
Yeah. Well, if you want to change our traffic suggestions from 30 to 25, yeah, why not? That's why I call them traffic suggestions. It's just like, we have stop suggestions too. But I do think, for consistency's sake, I mean, 7th Street, which going back to the traffic calming policy, is something where we get a lot of complaints, or I do, for people who speed there, and we've worked on it. We put our RFBs on there, and I always drive 25 because I love people tailgating me. But yeah, I mean, 3rd Street, actually, that came as a surprise when I read this, because it was like, oh my God, it's not 25?
Right.
It's 30. And it is going downhill, though, so, I mean, people are gonna go
It
faster
is
anyway.
challenging, yes.
But I think, if the neighbors are upset about it, and if it's, you're gliding into downtown anyway, it's a narrow street, yeah. It makes okay. It's okay with me. If it was the only street, yeah, I'd have an issue with that, but if it's consistent, yeah, consistency is good.
So just a couple thoughts. So 4th Street, you said, is 25 all the way to Harrison?
Yes,
But 3rd Street has been 35,
30.
30. And 4th Street is mostly business, not a lot of homes there, whereas 3rd Street is a lot of homes.
Right.
I wonder how 4th Street got to 25.
Oh, I know the answer to that.
Oh,
When,
let's see, this is a test.
when LCDC redid 4th Street, and they put it in, I actually was at the council meeting where they decided to change it from 30 to 25.
The Midtown Humpers.
Yeah,
right?
and it was, but it was actually kind of controversial because they pointed out that 3rd and 4th are a couplet, they are a collector, and that, the goal is to move traffic from one place to another. But it was decided to lower the speed limit to allow for more exposure of the businesses and make it safer for people crossing the street.
Okay, so we're trying to match that.
Yeah.
And again, I bring up the bike lane had no bearing. The 8-foot bike lane. I don't think my car even fits in one of those lanes, just giving you.
They
a
are
bike.
narrow lanes, and that's
They are
more reason
narrow.
to drive slow, yes.
Yeah, I'm good with it too.
Yeah.
You want to do a motion?
Yeah, I'll move to council approve the amendments to section 1032-140 and 1032-270 of the municipal code, the city Coeur d'Alene, in regard to the speed limit on 3rd Street.
Second. All those any other thoughts, comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Thanks.
Thank
Good
you.
job. All the way from the water department, it's Terry Pickle. Come on down, Terry.
Or up?
Up.
Good afternoon, committee members. Thank you for allowing me to come before you this afternoon. I come with kind of a different, unique situation for me. Our workload has been building so much that it's getting overwhelming for one person. We added on another person with some lighter duties as the workload continues to build. That's been kind of a challenge for us. Just to kind of give you a little bit of background, right now this time of year is technically our slowest time of the year, typically from late November to early February. We field anywhere from 5 to 10 phone calls an hour from customers, either external, internal, or return phone calls. In our busy season, that jumps from anywhere from 15 to 30 plus an hour, on top of all the other work we're trying to do. So we are looking at increasing that position from a reallocation from a department specialist, which kind of has limited duties, to originally we're going to do an administrative support 2, which was a pay grade 8. This is not a unique situation. The fire department had one of these, municipal services, and the planning department. So that's what we looked at in the budget, was to budget the difference between a pay grade 5 to a pay grade 8, which is about $4,986 originally. We had that line item in the personnel plan in our budget. It was under reorganization. That was recommended by the comptroller when I approached her with the idea of changing that administrative support to a support 2. She recommended that we put it there. So that's where it's been funded. It includes all benefits. So that was in our original financial plan. After budget approval at the beginning of 2020 fiscal year, we approached Human Resources regarding our plan. At that time, much to my chagrin, I learned that there was no longer an administrative support 2. In the last BDPA study, they looked at those job positions, and the duties were so similar that they had raised that to administrative assistant. So that position no longer was available, and I didn't realize it at the time. So we've been discussing over the past 4 months what to do there, and the recommendation based on the duties that we have seen was to reallocate to administrative 10 pay grade, or administrative assistant position. As mentioned, we budgeted $4,986 to pay grade 8. I received an estimate from our HR director that if we went to a pay grade 10 from March to September, would cost us $5,217, so we have a deficit of $231. What did we do before? Our administrative assistant typically worked an average of 3 to 5 hours per week overtime just to compensate, to help with those duties. We have specific duties and timelines we have to meet. The major one is our meter maintenance program. Anytime we change out a meter, that has to be recorded in Springbrook for accurate billing. So that's an essential issue, and I included the procedures in your packet. I'm sorry for the overload of information. I know that was a lot, but I wanted you to get an idea of a lot of the many things that we deal with on a daily basis. So I included that in there, and if you get a phone call in the middle of that, and you have to change page to do a work order or something, it wipes out that information in Springbrook. It's kind of difficult to deal with, so you need to sit there and do that. So she would come in an hour to an hour and a half early when those 60 to 80 meter changes per day came in, just to get through that before the phone call started. So, adding the department specialist helped, but it didn't alleviate all of that. So if you look at 3 to 5 hours per week throughout the year, you're looking anywhere from $6,500 to $11,000 in overtime. So we're fiscally, it makes sense to do something to save on that cost. Late Friday afternoon, and I apologize for the presentation. I hadn't planned that, but late Friday afternoon, I received a phone call of somebody with an issue with the process, and I understand that. The question was, did we follow protocol? As I understood it, we budgeted in a line item, that was recommended by finance. Council reviewed and approved the budgets. We approached HR to get the ball rolling on it, discovered my error there, and I own that error. Nobody else does but me. And so we had to figure out what we could do in the interim. This was the suggestion based on a review of the job duties that we're proposing to do and that we need to do. So then we budget is recommended, reviewed the detailed budget with the administration under our normal roundtable discussion. It was not a new employee, it was upgrading a current position, so we didn't feel that was necessary. Another mistake of mine, I probably should have made that or brought that up to council during our budget hearings. The budget was approved by council. We've approached HR. HR reviewed it, stated there's no Class 8. Based on the duties, recommended the administrative assistant. We've reviewed HR recommendation with our personnel director. Mr. Tymonson wears many hats in this city, and so he is actually the personnel director as well, so I did discuss that with him. And we are here taking this through General Services Public Works for a recommendation to City Council.
Thanks, Terry. Questions?
Have I shown sufficient evidence of the need in the overwhelming packet? And I apologize again for that. I think yes. Was the change budget? Yes, as instructed, but at the wrong scale. Should it have been in the correct line item? Apparently it should have. I did not know that, and I apologize to the council for that.
Thank you, Terry.
With that, I stand before you for questions.
Mr. Gookin.
Thank you. So there's a lot of information here.
Yes, sir.
And I'm a policymaker, I'm not administration. This seems administrative in nature. So the question I want to know is, what are you asking us?
I'm asking for recommendation to allow the reallocation of the department specialist to an administrative assistant, pay grade 10.
And that requires council to make that decision? It
That's
seems
my understanding. It
administrative.
has to be approved by council.
Because we function poorly when we have to make administrative decisions.
Now, speak for yourself. Come on.
Well,
We try.
we try, but we shouldn't. That's my opinion. And this is a budget item. So can't you wait till next year's budget?
Can we? Yeah,
Okay.
we could. I mean,
Well, then let's wait.
we have it budgeted this year.
Well,
Other than
we
$231.
budgeted what you asked for, and now you're changing what you asked for. So my recommendation would be to just wait until next year and then ask for it next year. Because otherwise, it seems like you're coming to us to make a change in the budget. I know wastewater came to us and asked for a position reclassification recently. But they demonstrated $200,000 that they were spending otherwise. So it seemed to me that that was a good move to do that reclassification. I'm not seeing the justification here despite the tremendous evidence. Sorry.
Geek.
I just wanted to try to be clear on this, on how this is working right now, is that there's a person who's in a full-time position, pay grade 5 right now, who's working overtime.
No. The administrative assistant is now working overtime to compensate for those duties that we could have that other person do if they were administrative assistant.
Okay, so the proposal is to take the pay grade 5, move it to a pay grade 10 because there is no 8.
Right.
And that is going to alleviate the overtime being spent by the administrative assistant into this, because you can transfer, I'm trying to figure out how you're saving this overtime by making this move.
We're trying to share those duties that really don't, if you had the department specialists working those duties, would be out of their pay scale.
So, okay, so you've owned up to the error, which is a $231 net. That's that
Yep.
error, okay. And so what I'm trying to get my head around is you're transferring the duties to this new position if it's approved, and that's going to save the $6,500 to $11,000 a year in overtime?
That is our hope, because those duties will be able to split, we'll be able to share some of the data entry to save time on that. Right now, the administrative assistant does that data entry.
Okay. So I can see the conversation, that makes sense, push it to the next budget cycle, but what would the $231 error investment save us if we do it now versus waiting till the next budget cycle? And it sounds like it's a $10,000 swing, so it seems like it would make sense to go ahead and do this now.
Yes. That's what we're hoping, that it would save at least a good portion of that overtime.
Well, I would be about saving money. So, anything else, or can I make a motion?
So I know how frugal you are, Terry, and you'll always take the fall. And you're probably one of the cheapest guys I know. And that's a compliment, don't get me wrong. But anytime you can save money and save overtime, in our world, overtime is not efficient. It's like, oops, or you need to get somebody else. So I'm going to support it.
Also on that, I look at the stress on the employee for having to come in there, working extra hours, that's burnout, potential burnout that I want to prevent.
Right. And again, you had so much information, I had to take a nap.
I'm sorry.
Come back to it, because it just went on. And then I finally called you, and I go, please, just narrow it down to, are we saving money, And is that what we're trying to do?
Yep.
And be more efficient, so.
I was impressed you still have a fax machine with fax paper.
All right.
That's cool. So I'd make a motion that council approve the reallocation of the department specialist position in the water department to administrative assistant. Do we need to put those numbers in there, pay grade numbers that they are, or are we good with just that title? The title's fine?
Oh, I'll second that. So this is recommended to go to consent. Do you want to move it around?
Let's put it on the agenda.
You're good?
Yep.
You're good with that? Okay. So all those in favor of approval of this reallocation and move it to, bring it to the council? Vote, say aye.
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 Will that be on consent, or will we be addressing council?
I'm sorry.
I said, are this going to be on consent, or are we
So
addressing
we're
council?
going to bring it to council.
Okay, that's fine.
That keeps Mr. Gookin on his toes,
Yes,
fine.
well, keeps him on his toes.
on you on your toes,
And I'm voting no.
and he's voting no. So, all those in favor, I said that? Yes, you did. I did, thank you. Opposed, we'll be moving on. I think that's it, right?
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I was going to ask while our fearless HR leader, how often do we do updates on the job descriptions? This thing seems to go on and on and on about the duties. Do we do that very often? I'm sorry. This was kind of I had
Well,
notes
she's
at
here.
the end of this thing. You're here. We're going to use you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so we do amendments to all of our job descriptions as they go out to the departments every month for evals. So if there are fairly minor clarifications of wording, something minor that's not going to push a leveling to higher or lower, we just go ahead and make those amendments. But once you add enough to a job description or take enough away that would reflect on the leveling, then we make sure our consultants take a second look at that, and if there's a different recommendation, we bring that back. But we're constantly going into the job descriptions and making sure that they are up to date.
Okay.
Thank you. For the council meeting, I know Mr. Pickle supplied a lot of information, some of which is so small my magnifying glass couldn't enlarge it. Can you provide us with some details for the council meeting, specifically regarding the position 10, the administrative assistant who is doing the overtime now? Can you provide us with all the overtime numbers for the council meeting, year to date?
Sure, I can pull that off of just time cards.
All right, thank
Yeah.
you.
Anything else for you?
Nope.
We're good? Thank you so much.
You're
Appreciate
welcome.
it. So hearing nothing else, I think we need to move to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Been moved, seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks, everyone.